Hello, I'm your host, Efi Pylarinou, and today I am delighted to link with Brazil, one of my favorite Latin American countries, and to welcome with us a special guest, Aaron Stanley, who wears many hats in the crypto world. He is the chief content editor at the Filecoin Foundation, and he's also the founder of the Brazilian and Latin American crypto newsletter. And that was really the reason I reached out to him, because it's a very interesting newsletter, and I wanted to discuss, Brazil is a huge market, innovative market, and we really need to be looking at it. First of all, welcome, dear Aaron.
Thank you so much for having me, Efi. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's nice to be on the other side of the mic. Usually I'm the one doing the interviewing, but it's nice to be on the other side,
Exactly. Let's see how well you do. You do well on that other side, right? So tell us briefly your crypto, and when I say crypto, I do want to make sure that it's a much broader term. I'm talking about digital assets. The Filecoin Foundation is one of those cases where we're talking about a protocol that is not really in what I call blockchain for finance world. So tell us your journey into crypto and briefly what Filecoin is doing.
Yeah, so I started my first sort of introduction to crypto came in 2013. I was working at the Financial Times in Washington D.C. Actually, I was doing a lot of kind of political and business reporting there, and I had a friend actually who took a job she actually left like a high-ranking kind of congressional job as a congressional staffer, and she went to go work as the communications officer at the Bitcoin Foundation. If anybody remembers the Bitcoin, it was like very short-lived, initial Bitcoin lobby group. And then she was pitching me on Bitcoin, like, hey, you should write a story about Bitcoin, et cetera, et cetera. And she connected with me some people, and I was, talking to some experts, and I'm like, wow, this is actually pretty interesting, right? So I did a few articles on Bitcoin around that time. And then that was kind of around the time when Mt. Gox happened and Silk Road, and it kind of looked like it was dead, and for a few years there. And it kind of came back to life again in like 2016, 2017, and I got interested in it from I look at this stuff mainly from like an editorial perspective, right? I didn't buy anything at the time, though I probably should have, but and I actually got a commission to write an article about the Winklevoss twins Bitcoin ETF in 2016. And I guess fast forward 7 years, we still don't have a spot Bitcoin ETF in the US, but anyway, I got to talk to the Winklevoss twins about their thesis around Bitcoin, and they kind of it was one of these things where like I didn't really know what to think about them. They were they're kind of these like they have this kind of like controversial like reputation, right? They're these very kind of skilled, interesting entrepreneurs, but they're kind of these like Harvard like meathead type guys. Like I don't know what do I make of these guys, right? But I talked to them. I was like, wow, these guys actually have like really thought this out well, and they kind of red pilled me. I have to give a lot of credit to Tyler Winklevoss in particular for he spent like an hour on the phone with me one day, and he was just walking me through like why they think Bitcoin is like a superior form of money and all this kind of stuff. So anyways, that kind of like rekindled my interest, and then I ended up somehow CoinDesk found me, and I started writing for CoinDesk, some contributing some pieces for CoinDesk in like early 2017 about an ICO, about ICOs, and I was like, what the heck is an ICO? And it became a thing, obviously. And I ended up sticking around at CoinDesk for about 4 or 5 years in different capacities as a reporter, editor. My last hustle at CoinDesk was I was programming, doing all the content for our Consensus conference, which is one of the flagship event of CoinDesk anyway, but also one of the more
of
bigger
the industry, you would say.
Yeah. So initially in New York, and then we did 2 years pandemic virtual, and then now it's in Austin, Texas. And I decided I wanted to try something a bit new, so I jumped over to Filecoin Foundation about 2 years ago. So I've been working on some different content projects at Filecoin Foundation, some event activations and things of that nature. And I mean, Filecoin is really interesting because it's like you mentioned, it's a different type of use case. It's not just financial. It's data storage, and it's a little more advanced than just like, oh, we're gonna like store data on the blockchain, right? It's really more about just providing essentially like the proof and the immutability and the verifiability of the data, where okay, like we can verify that this data is stored and that it hasn't been tampered with, and we use the blockchain and ZK proofs to essentially do that. And I think even now that we're seeing the emergence of generative AI, I think what was previously sort of like seemed like kind of a wonky thing where it's it's like, why do I really care where my data is stored, right? As long as it's there somewhere, like why do I really care? But now it's like, okay, like we've got all these large language models and these AI models that are just hoovering up data, and how do you know that the data that they're training is or that they're using in their training models is correct and accurate and not tampered with? How do you know that your own data hasn't been tampered with and is not like some sort of deep fake, like artificial intelligence generated image or video or something? And so having like kind of this system of provability and reliability of data, I think is going to become a very critical just feature of any kind of data storage system, whether it's Filecoin or anything else, moving ahead in the age of AI. So that's what's really interesting with Filecoin. We have like well over like an exabyte worth of actual real data like stored on the network right now, which is pretty interesting. And an exabyte is like, you're getting to the levels of I mean, if you remember in school and your teachers telling you like these big numbers like a billion and a trillion, and like it's like so hard to even fathom like how much that actually is. Like we're getting to the level of like an exabyte is like, it's like 400 million like floppy disks worth of data. It's numbers you can't, like the brain can't even like fathom how big that is, right? So we're getting to like, this is becoming like a commercial, a commercially scalable thing, right? So that's super interesting. And then I also going back to the Brazil side, I'm married to a Brazilian, so like my interest in Brazil was sort of kindled just based on that. I've spent a lot of time here over the years, and I noticed I was actually living here in 2021 during the pandemic, during the bull market, the crypto bull market, and I realized that there was really no English language resource at all on this market, and it's 200 million people. It's like the 7th largest economy in the world in terms of GDP. It's a super tech savvy population, and crypto is becoming really popular here. And I was like, how is it that like nobody in like kind of the, I guess, quote unquote, like Western crypto world is paying any attention to this? And it seemed kind of, it was like, it almost seems like it's like that, this old joke of like, there's a Chicago school economist sees a $100 bill laying on the ground and he's about to pick it up.
Right?
If it was a real $100 bill, like somebody else would have picked it up.
Somebody must have picked it up, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of felt that way about Brazil. How come like there's nobody paying any attention to this? This is crazy. So I just sort of spun up a newsletter. I mean, sometimes just being a content creator, you just have to like just start doing something and see if it works, right? And as people kept reading it and found it valuable. So I kind of kept going with it, and I started doing some podcasts. I'm on YouTube now, just trying to do a lot more kind of just news analysis and summaries, and just trying to provide English language content about what's happening here to the kind of the gringo world, I guess, and try and do a lot of like longer form interviews with people, entrepreneurs in the space, and also people who are looking to expand their businesses here in Brazil as well, looking at this as a market. So I'm trying to kind of create like a two-way bridge essentially between Brazil and the kind of the gringo world. And I've also been expanding a bit more into covering other parts of LATAM as well. I'm not really like, I'm more a Brazil guy than I am like a LATAM guy. So I've got I've got some people that have been helping me out with that, just doing some content around what's happening in like Mexico and Argentina and Colombia and some of these other places, but not nearly at the scale of what I'm doing in Brazil. Brazil's primary focus.
I was reading, Aaron, in the latest Chainalysis index report that they put out, that Brazil ranks 9th globally in terms of how they measure crypto adoption. And in any case, in my mind, I always thought that Argentina, being a country that's changed I think 9 times currencies and still has troubles, would be, the place where people do really, without understanding the technical part of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, they would very much understand what it's all about, the principles. And I do remember the early days of Andreas Antonopoulos, who used to visit these countries and talk there and tell us in the West that, you have to go there and then you see how the audience and the people understand and what are really the use cases. I'm not sure, how much of that you see today. I guess the question is beyond the investment narrative of cryptocurrencies, right? And the role of crypto exchanges in that respect. What are real use cases, or what is resonating in these countries? What are you seeing in Brazil? Why are people, using in the ways that they are using cryptocurrencies, and especially in a country like Brazil with the very popular PIX, real-time payments? Give us a sense, and keeping in mind the success of financial inclusion because of PIX and Nubank and other fintech players.
Yeah, it's a great question. The answer really kind of it really varies a lot by country in this part of the world, right? Like what is kind of the killer use case, I guess, of crypto is a little bit different in Argentina versus Venezuela versus here in Brazil. Like in Argentina, as you mentioned, you have a lot more people that are like the realities of inflation is just like it's a daily thing, and like everybody in Argentina is kind of like a professional forex trader, in one way or another, right? Trying to figure out how to kind of arbitrage like the various, the peso with like kind of black market dollars with Bitcoin and with Tether and all these kind of things. So there's a lot more. It's a lot more of like just sort of using using crypto as like an immediate, sort of hedge and store value and transfer mechanism, as a way of exiting kind of the fiat, what is a pretty like bleak inflationary environment, right? And in Venezuela, you also have a lot more. This was actually detailed in a Chainalysis report that came out maybe about a year ago. It wasn't the crypto adoption report, but it was a different report. I believe maybe it was the same report. I can't remember, but they basically kind of went through and they were analyzing like what, out of all the wallets in this country, like they were analyzing, okay, what do we think these people are actually using it for, right? So in places like Venezuela, it was much heavier on the payment side, right? So people are using crypto as a payment mechanism much more than like as an investment. And Brazil was actually quite heavily skewed toward the investment side, because I think for the reasons you mentioned, like you have the payment systems here actually work pretty well, right? Particularly PIX, PIX executes about 150 million transactions a day. It's pretty flawless. It's only been around for 3 years, and about 90% of the adult population uses it. And it's basically free and it's instantaneous. It's a really incredible system that they've built. And so I think the crypto as like a payments mechanism use case isn't really like, it's not really a thing here, I guess. There are some interesting projects that have spun up. Like there's actually a guy, I'm actually going to record a podcast with him shortly, but he built an app that basically you can basically live your entire life paying with Tether using PIX. So you can scan a PIX code and it'll basically like you're paying this person in Tether, but it does the conversion and everything, and you're paying this person in Tether through the PIX system essentially. So you can live your entire life like basically without a bank account, just paying for stuff with Tether, like just paying via PIX at like, the
again, there it's an inflation hedge, right? You would do that.
Yeah, well, you can.
You don't live in a Brazilian real.
Yeah, so the inflation here has cooled a little bit in the last like year or two. The central bank has started to reduce rates, so inflation is more or less under control, I guess, which is good. However, talk to any Brazilian above, over 30, 40 years old, and these people have lived through various currencies. They've lived through hyperinflationary periods. They've lived through, asset seizures and that types of thing. Bank accounts being, half your bank account is frozen, whatever. People have lived through that sort of stuff. So it's always in the back of people's mind that this could happen, right? The situation is not as acute as in other countries in Latin America, but it is something that people do want to find an alternative to the real to store value, right? So, and also I think a lot of people, people here will kind of measure the value of the real against the dollar, right? Just so maybe say inflation is, fine at like 2% or something, but if the dollar is appreciating against the real and the real is losing purchasing power against, people will kind of feel poorer, right? It just is like a psychological thing, right? Where especially because back like 10, 15 years ago when the real was very high against the dollar, Brazilians, like it was cheaper for a Brazilian to like fly all the way to Miami, buy an iPhone at like a Best Buy in Miami, and then return. It was cheaper to do that than it was to like just buy an iPhone at the local store, right? Just because you have so much purchasing power. And now it's kind of inverted where, you go to the US and you're kind of like, people have like major sticker shock, like, wow, like stuff is really expensive here. So I think people kind of look at like, they kind of measured their wealth and like, or the value of the real based on like, what is it against the dollar, just as much as they would measure it based on like, well, how much has the price of bread gone up in the last year or whatever. So there is. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. I mean, Brazil is a major trading partner, both import and export. So what is going on there? I'm asking because recently I was at the CB Summit here in Zug and met one Brazilian entrepreneur. The company has actually got the infrastructure and issued a stable coin pegged to the Brazilian real. And from what he was saying, that was his marketing pitch, that it is for people that are doing business abroad, and they really need this convertibility to US dollars because there's limited convertibility. Is that the case? Do stable coins, not dollar pegged stable coins, but Brazil real pegged stable coins actually have a place in the economy?
Yeah, it's not necessarily something that like retail people are going to like buy and hold as part of their portfolio, right? I think, by and large, stablecoin adoption here in Brazil it's like overwhelmingly USDT. I mean, the most recent numbers, it was about, I think 82% of, I think most recent numbers for July that were reported to the government. It's like 82% of all crypto trading volume was USDT. And that was about $3 billion worth of volume, which is pretty significant. And USDC to a much smaller extent. It's notable, but it's not nearly as big as USDT. And there's been a lot of Brazilian real peg stablecoins that have been popping up onto the market that really serve sort of the function that you're talking about, where it's really more of a convertibility mechanism, right? Because the real is a soft currency on the global market. There are some convertibility issues. It can be expensive or difficult to convert into dollars. And having these stable coins, as you're seeing, the use case for these stable coins seems to be just basically as kind of providing on and off ramps into crypto, right? For exchanges or other brokers. So as a Brazilian, resident, I might mint some, BRZ or whatever the token is. And then I'm going to use that to onboard into a different exchange. And I'm going to exchange that for something else. I'm not necessarily going to like hold that in my portfolio. I'm going to use that as an on ramp to get into, whatever platform I'm looking to get into, and then it's an off ramp, and then also on the cross border front, really using that as a way of maybe kind of like some of these convertibility issues where it's easier to maybe go from BRZ, which is kind of the largest. It's actually one of the largest non-dollar pegged stable coins in the market right now. It might even be the biggest. I'm not entirely sure, but it's definitely one of the biggest in terms of overall volume.
No, you made me curious. I want to compare it to the euro. stable coin, which is not, a big success. And it's,
Yeah,
I think, maybe,
it's probably
yeah,
it's probably about, yeah, I guess I haven't looked at the numbers, but I would assume it's been around longer than some of these digital euro stable coins have been.
yeah,
So and there is I mean it was also, I mean, back before the FTX collapse, it was because FTX was kind of the main platform where this was traded, or where it had the most, there's most liquidity on FTX. So once the FTX platform collapsed, that sort of, it took a bit of a hit, I guess. Um, but it has seen like a pretty decent demand. Like people do seem to be using this. So it is interesting, and it is interesting that in that, the sense that like there is a use case for like non-dollar peg
yeah.
stablecoins.
I love it, Aaron, because here we have a real use case, a real country where you see why there is a reason to have all these types of payment mechanisms and types of money. We have the very successful PIX system. We have dollar pegged stable coins. We have real pegged stable coins. Soon you're going to have a CBDC, and everything can coexist, and it's not a question of one winner takes all, and it's really exciting, I must say. Give us a bit of a sense of what's going on with the crypto exchanges in Brazil. You mentioned earlier that FTX was the dominant before the collapse. What is going on with Binance, Coinbase, and the rest?
Well, so you basically have like three different buckets of crypto brokerages here that are operating in Brazil. The first, you have kind of your local like domestic exchanges that are domiciled here. So things like Mercado Bitcoin, and I mean, there's a bunch of these that are. I mean, these guys have kind of had a tough time, in the last couple of years, just with the, they boomed a lot in 21, 22, and then they've had the last like 18 months has been pretty rough. I would even put like Bitso in this bucket. Bitso, I mean, they were pretty big throughout the rest of Latin America. Then they entered Brazil, about 18 months ago, and they're doing okay here. But I think just it's just a tough, like just tough across, across the whole industry right now, right? If you're a crypto exchange, right, a lot of these guys are just burning cash, just waiting for the next bull market, So you've got a lot of these guys. They've got licenses. They're pretty well established locally. They're offering products and services like it's very like localized, right? Like it's very and some of these guys have been expanding a little bit. Like Mercado Bitcoin has they acquired an exchange in Portugal, like the largest exchange in Portugal. So some of these guys have been expanding a bit, or like trying to get into like kind of new lines of business aside from just buying and selling crypto, basically. So you have like these domestic exchanges. You have kind of your overseas exchanges, like your Binances and your Bybits and all those guys, the OKX and these guys. And so these guys are all, at least either, they're all at least available here. And it's, I mean, there's been kind of a big fight between them and the domestic exchanges over the last year, like, a couple of years, I should say. Which seems to be entering a new phase now that there's legislation on the books, and there's gonna be regulations coming out, and people begin being able to apply for VASP licenses here, probably around this time next year, actually. And then you also have, but the big kind of differentiator with the Brazil market, I think that's super interesting, is you have a lot of the big fintech platforms here, like your Nubank and like Mercado Pago and PicPay, and these things are all offering crypto now as well. So Nubank has something like 60 million users, super, it's a huge success, right? And they realized that a lot of people were withdrawing a lot of their funds from their Nubank accounts to go to crypto exchanges to buy crypto. So it's like, well, what if we just offer crypto in our app, right? So these guys have offered crypto. So, and then these guys have really been, I mean, it's maybe not the most robust product selection, right? It's like fairly basic, like, okay, you can buy Bitcoin, you can buy ETH, maybe the the spreads you're getting and the prices you're getting are not as competitive as you might get
But
on
it's
Binance.
easier for retail customers, I guess, and customers that are not into trading. It's a question of
Yeah,
convenience and
yeah,
familiarity.
if you're just looking to buy and hold, right?
Yes.
You know, it works, and they've had a huge success. Like all these platforms have at least, you know, 1 million plus people who are holding crypto on their platforms. So it's been a huge success as far as just getting, you know, kind of new eyeballs, like you know, getting new people into the industry, or new people, you know, buying these assets, or at least you're interested in these assets. So that's been really interesting. So you kind of have these three buckets,
Yeah.
which I think is pretty unique worldwide, because I think you have the, you know, the domestic exchanges, you have the international exchanges, and then you have kind of the banks and the fintech. So you even have like banks here that have their own like crypto apps, right? Which you don't,
Like
you know,
what? Like Banco Pactual, or
so like BTG Pactual has its own crypto brokerage. It's not like on their, it's not like on the BTG Pactual app, but it's like a separate app,
yeah.
right? That you can buy crypto through. I think once the licensing structure comes out, and the regulations from the central bank come out around this time next year, I think you'll get a lot of the bigger banks that will come in and begin offering crypto brokerage services as well. They're just kind of waiting for the regulations to become clear before they actually do that. So that's really unique. Like I mean, it's going to be years before that ever happens in the US, right? So
Yes.
the way things are going currently, it's going to be a long time, right?
It's going to be a long time. What about tokenized assets? Again, you know, at the CV summit, and you know, I noticed that in other discussions too, the potential and the opportunity of tokenizing real world assets, anything from real estate, but not only. It can be, you know, passion collectibles. It can be other items that it makes sense to fractionalize them. And there's a lot of excitement about that, because we are seeing buy-in from big incumbents, you know, from BlackRock, from Fidelity, you know, companies that are tokenizing simple financial contracts like US Treasuries, and then much more complicated structures. Is there any of that excitement or discussion or opportunities in the horizon in Brazil, from what you are hearing and understanding?
Yeah, it's actually, this is actually probably one of the world's leading markets for that. I would posture to say, both in the on the question of like adoption of like types of products that are actually kind of on the market now, and also with regards to just regulation. The CVM, which is basically the, you know, the Brazilian SEC, has been they've been very like kind of cooperative with the industry around creating you know, some frameworks like how asset tokenizers can issue these things and issue them to the public. So there's a sandbox there's a few different tokenization projects operating in right now. You know, everything from, they're tokenizing all sorts of stuff, you know, receivables, like precatory notes, you know, shares of like tokenized shares of private companies, right? Having like a secondary market where you can trade tokenized equity, basically. You know, a lot of this stuff is only available to like accredited investors right now.
Yes,
Obviously,
yeah.
but you have, but the fact that a lot of this,
packaging loans to and tokenizing them, that type of thing.
yeah. So you have a lot of, so like Mercado Bitcoin has been doing a lot of this. There's another company called Liqui, LIQI, which has been doing a lot of interesting stuff on this front. They actually got an investment from venture investment from Itaú, which is the country's largest bank.
Yeah.
So, which is significant because the country's banks are also looking at this. And then, and the types of assets is quite interesting, because you have, you know, everything from, you know, kind of carbon credit type of projects, which personally I'm not like super, you know, bullish on like tokenized. I just think like the carbon credit market, people need to like figure out like the carbon credit marketplace in general first before you start trying to tokenize. Like it's not gonna do any good if there's like 100 different versions of tokenized carbon credits floating around that like aren't like, you know, interoperable or whatever. But also things like even you know, tokenizing like like rights to like football players, right? So you have so under, I mean, this is kind of a fun like Brazilian example, I guess. But so for example, like Neymar, like take Neymar as an example. So like anytime that he gets, transferred or he gets, acquired by a new club on, if he goes from, now he's at Paris Saint-Germain, but say he gets acquired by Manchester United, like the team that actually developed him, according to like FIFA rules, the team that like develops that player gets a small cut of that deal, right? So there's tokens that exist now where Neymar he was developed by this team called Santos, which is like a port city outside of Sao Paulo. This is where Pele was developed, was kind of incubated as well. So like anytime like Neymar would go to a new team, like Santos gets like a cut of that, right? So, but there's tokens now where, okay, if I own these Santos tokens, like anytime a Santos player gets transferred to a new team and like Santos gets a payout, like I, as a token holder, I would get a payout based on the amount of like tokens that I own, right? So like I can kind of own like a share in I get a stake in success, or I can invest in these teams based on like how, whatever. So it's just kind of like, these are things that couldn't exist before, right? Before it would just not been practical to do this kind of stuff, right? I think the other important thing to mention about the tokenization angle here is that with the central bank CBDC project, which is called DREX, it was formerly Digital Real, now it's DREX is their official name for it. But this is basically it's called a CBDC, like it's like basically a wholesale CBDC, but it's really much more. It's like a broader, just like blockchain tokenization environment, right? Where they're creating this environment where essentially the objective is basically have like the entire financial system sort of running on tokenization and smart contracts, right? So right now in the pilot project, they're actually tokenizing public bonds, like government bonds, so that, and they're experimenting with how this works. So like as a, one day as like a new bank customer, I have a choice of buying like Bitcoin, or I could put 100 reais into Bitcoin, or I could put 100 reais into a tokenized public bond that's paying 12% return, for however long the maturity of the maturity cycle is or whatever. So there's things like that like are this is all innovation that's being like promoted by the central bank and by the government in general, which is really interesting because this is not really what you find in other countries, I guess, and like maybe at least not in the US, which is kind of where sort of most of the energy in the crypto market still is right now. Yeah. So you basically like, and the central bank actually like uses this language too. It's not like crypto utopian people like saying this. This is like the guys at the central bank and the president of the central bank saying like, oh, we're trying to create basically a tokenized environment for like the entire.
Are they working, Aaron, with blockchain infrastructure vendors, I will call them? Is the central bank working with them, or is it just they're developing their own technology that we don't even know that it's blockchain? We don't know anything.
Yep. So the whole system is built on, at least for the pilot, like there's no guarantee they're going to go with it, but the current pilot is being built on Hyperledger Bazoo, right? Okay. So which is an Ethereum compatible, EVM compatible, permissioned kind of landscape or permissioned environment essentially. So what that means is that you end up getting a lot of basically anybody who's building infrastructure that's for Ethereum or EVM compatible can like potentially deploy in this type of environment, right? So I think you're going to end up with an environment where if they can attract enough, if there's going to be enough liquidity in this environment, which there will be because it's going to be the official financial system of the country, I think you'll end up getting a lot of what we now know as kind of just sort of like Wild West DeFi type protocols that will, things like, like Aave or Compound or things that have been very successful in what we now know as DeFi. I mean, these guys are all going to, these guys are going to go to where the liquidity is ultimately, right? So if they can run these smart contracts in a permissioned environment within this DREX ecosystem. I mean, that's obviously going to be, there's going to be a lot more liquidity there than there will be in kind of what we, just sort of the existing DeFi environment, I suppose. So that's super interesting. And, they've done an interesting job of kind of incorporating, like, what I like to say is like, there's, there's kind of like three ways you can think about the future. There's three different like sort of pathways you could take, like for the future of finance, right? You have kind of like the crypto anarchist, like Bitcoin maximalist, like hyper Bitcoinization, we're all going to run on Bitcoin type of a route. You have kind of like the, the kind of the TradFi, like turbulent state route, where it's kind of like the Chinese route, where like everybody has their own, credit score and central bank tokens that you get that's based on your credit score, that like surveillance state kind of thing, which, okay, we don't really want that. And, I feel like there's going to be this, like the TradFi and like DeFi worlds are going to converge in a way that, how do you make that like the healthiest convergence as possible, right? Where you take, okay, what works from current TradFi and like what works from this current like DeFi, like permissionless financial system that's being built, and how do you kind of merge these two in a way that incorporates like the best of both, right? And I want to believe, at least I think there's a strong case to be made that what's happening in Brazil here does kind of embody that. Like they're taking kind of like, okay, what's the best what's the best that we have as far as payments innovation and financial innovation on the kind of the TradFi front? How do you infuse values and kind of the ethos of the world of crypto and Ethereum, and kind of things like just like privacy and like interoperability and all these types of things? How do you infuse that into this new system? And I feel like they've got kind of the right
I think it's similar, Aaron, to the latest pilot with the Central Bank of France, of Singapore, and the European Central Bank, where they tested a cross-border FX transaction using an automated market maker pool, which is really, a concept that is core to DeFi, and they used it to test that. So we're going in that direction. As you said, we don't know how many of these pilots are going to materialize, and I guess it depends on each jurisdiction. Where I am here in Switzerland, it really doesn't make sense to issue a retail CBDC, but it makes a whole lot of sense to issue a wholesale CBDC. So, but as you said, central banks are each of them doing their work alone, and yeah, who knows?
It's an iterative process too, right? I mean, I think what's interesting with the Brazilian central bank, and I guess I haven't been following as much as I probably should be some of these, what's happening with these other central banks, but at least with the Brazil one, I mean, when they originally proposed a digital real, it was the idea was to be a retail CBDC, right?
Yes.
And then, they quickly encountered, or they realized, like, okay, like how do you do this without just disintermediating the entire like existing financial system, right? And there's not really like an easy way to do that, right? So what they were able to divide, they kind of pivoted, and they're like, well, what if we build out the digital real as like a wholesale CBDC in this kind of closed environment of banks that are financial institutions that are in kind of the closed network.
Yeah.
And then essentially every bank they'll be able to essentially like issue, they'll be able to tokenize customer deposits and basically issue, stable coins to customers as funds against those deposits. And then all those stable coins would be backed 1-to-1 by like the wholesale CBDC. And so it's an interesting way. And so basically every bank is kind of like, it functions as almost like its own little like Ethereum roll up, like in the environment, right? They're like processing all these transactions and they're batching them, and then they're deploying them and confirming them on the layer one. So it's a really interesting, it's very interesting to see how, they're adopting like a lot of this stuff that was just sort of weird crypto like terminology and concepts before. It's like, wow, maybe this stuff like there's these ideas are like, if it's a good idea, people are going to use it, right? So
yeah. Automated market makers now. Bankers are talking about zero trust knowledge roll-ups and so on, and who would have imagined? And what today might seem theoretical and geeky and technical. I was listening to again at the summit about liquid staking versus traditional staking, and that's kind of a step ahead. 2 or 3 years ago, bankers we're trying to understand what staking is and how it's done differently. And now we're trying to understand what liquid staking is and why it's growing. It's just, the innovation is relentless despite the winter in funding. So it's just amazing. Aaron, we could discuss for hours. There's so many things that are exciting. Before we close, I want to ask you, in Brazil, in this ecosystem, do you really get this sentiment that exists in the West? Sort of, here is the land of innovation. We are admiring what Nubank has accomplished in Brazil, but also the PIX public infrastructure. Does the country itself really understand how well they have done in a short time period?
Honestly, I don't think so, to be perfectly honest. But I think it's I'm not sure they've really taken that to heart, I guess. I guess I'm not really sure why that is, but it's just not something that people, it's something they should be more proud of, I guess. It's more, I guess, it's maybe not it's a bit too wonky of a topic for some people if you're not like a fintech person or something. It's maybe you're like, well, it's just payments. Like, why is that interesting, right? But there is kind of this sentiment. I think as we go along here, I mean, you're already. I think what's happening in Brazil will ultimately become like the prototype for how other countries approach financial innovation. And that's really one of the reasons I've been like really investing a lot of my time into building out my platform here. It's not just because I think Brazil is interesting. It's like I think this is information that like people around the world are eventually going to want to know, right? Like what how did Brazil go, implement a financial solution that where like 90% of the adults in the country, even people that don't really have like proper banking access, are now able to use PIX and transfer payments easily. How did they do that, right? Or and with this DREX CBDC project, I think this will ultimately become the model. I mean, I know for a fact that there's a lot of other central banks in the region that are basically, they've kind of just given up, even, or they've not given up, but they've kind of paused some of their R&D on their digital currency projects, and they're just like, well, we're just gonna wait for see what Brazil comes out with, and then we're just gonna kind of copy them, right? So I think a lot of this, I think what's being developed here is really going to be a prototype for, because it's not only it's very innovative, it's very effective, right? And they've got like a track record of success on implementing these things. But the thing is, it's also a G20 country, right? Like this is one of the largest countries. It's not like, I mean, nothing against like the Bahamas or something,
Exactly.
but look, if something that works in the Bahamas is not going to work in a country with 200 million people necessarily, right? So I think what's happening here is going to be, my personal hypothesis is that this is going to be the model for how like a lot of these other large countries ultimately approach these types of
I must say, Aaron, that me sitting here in Europe, I have my eyes to Brazil and to India, right? Because that's also another country that has very successfully implemented a public-private infrastructure at scale that has impacted the country and continues, with UPI and Aadhaar, with whatever limitations there are. But I think those are the two major examples that we are all looking at.
And India was #1 on that Chainalysis adoption survey, crypto adoption survey you mentioned earlier. That was the top country in the whole world, was India, which is super interesting.
It's super interesting because they have a very different approach than Brazil. Aaron, before we close, a personal question. What are you reading these days? What are you excited about? What movies are you watching? What are you feeding your soul to be excited?
I've honestly gotten a lot more into like just the media landscape of things. Like I've been watching, like I'm consuming a lot more. I'm probably consuming more content about like podcast creation and like audience development and stuff than I am about crypto.
Okay.
There's lots of really good resources on like YouTube and things of that nature for just learning about like tips on like how to, like, it's like being kind of an independent content creator is like you just need all these like kind of weird random skills that like you never would have needed in the other, like how to design like a thumbnail for a YouTube video. There's like a whole like school of thought on like how to do that and like how to like, anyway. So all these things are kind of, I'm enjoying the adventure of like learning these things and kind of stacking these kind of new skills and trying to and I've also been playing a lot more chess lately because my son's kind of into chess. So I've been trying to like play, there's a whole like world of like chess YouTube that's just like this whole entire like its own monster, I guess. But
Yeah, you bring me back to the years that my son was at the age where I used to take him to chess camp for a week when they had the school break, and he loved it. And then for a couple of years now, he's just entered university. He left that love, but now he's like back again. It comes back. It's a wonderful game.
And when I mean, the internet, like, or just the the social platforms and apps and just the connectivity has just really made it a different experience, because it's like when I was a kid, I was like, okay, I can beat everybody in my class in school, but like, how do I improve? If I'm already, and then I downloaded like chess.com and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go beat some people on the internet, like school these people, and then I'm getting creamed and getting crushed by everybody. I'm like, wait a minute, like this is hard. And then so these resources like on YouTube and on the apps and things, I mean, this is all stuff that like 20 years ago when I was a kid, like I had no access to any, like, what opening do I use against like pawn e4 or whatever, like things like this. Like there's no way to teach me that stuff, but on YouTube you can just learn all this stuff instantaneously. It's like, wow, this is such an incredible wealth of. But the thing I like about it is just,
and you can go to generative AI and ask specific questions, strategic questions, and get answers, right?
Yeah, like what's the best defense against this opening or what, like things like that. You can find all these things out, and it's just a very good way of like keeping your like it's just every move is like this complex puzzle you have to solve for. So it's just a very good way of keeping your brain like you have to be like functioning very very high level, like on every move, otherwise you get
and focused. I think it's an excellent way to not practice distraction, because in a lot of the things that we are doing on the internet, online, unfortunately there's a lot of distraction, and we have limited big chunks of time where we're focused. So playing chess is practicing that skill also of focus. That's wonderful.
Absolutely.
Aaron, thank you so much, and I will share, of course, with our audience your newsletter and where they can follow you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me, Efi. I really appreciate it.